we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
King Charles just made a quiet move that plunged Camilla into her worst crisis yet. In the dead of night, he secretly called Princess Anne and told her she had to take charge. Then he handed over critical documents, giving her every ounce of power the British crown holds. Camilla found out and stormed in with absolute fury. She warned Charles directly if he signed those papers, their marriage was completely finished. She demanded a choice, his wife or Anne. What Charles said next completely shocked her. Now what lies ahead for her is the exact royal nightmare she spent 30 long years running away from. There was no official record of this meeting. It all went down in the dark. Suddenly the phone rang in Princess Anne's private quarters. She picked up the receiver, and for 3 long, chilling seconds, absolutely nothing happened. There was only complete heavy silence. But she could hear her brother the king breathing raggedly on the line. It sounded heavy-strained and deeply frightening. She bypassed all royal protocol, asking him simply if he was okay, speaking to him strictly as his sister. Having known Charles her whole life, those 3 quiet seconds told her everything she needed to know. Something was terribly wrong. Whatever had happened, it could not wait for the morning light. He needed her by his side as quickly as possible. Just 6 hours later, Anne was sitting directly across from her brother. "You need to take the lead now," that was his very first sentence before his raw terror took hold. Looking up at her, he admitted he was far more terrified than he had ever let on to anyone else in his entire life. Not of dying, but of leaving everything exposed before it was ready. Charles reached across the space between them and quietly took her hand, a gesture he had not made since their mother passed away. Then he slid a thick stack of papers toward her. These were the legal papers that would formally prepare Anne to step in as Princess Royal Regent. If you do not understand what that actually means, listen closely, because this is crucial. A regent is never just some ceremonial stand-in. A regent is not merely an advisor. They absorb every ounce of authority the monarch wields and execute it fully. If Charles ever became unable to perform his royal duties, Anne would not be sitting on the sidelines. She would be running the entire nation with the absolute weight and authority of the British crown backing her choices. Those papers resting on the table represented the most immense power the king had ever placed directly in front of another human being. Anne stared down at the documents, the sheer weight of them hitting her like a wall. As her eyes swept the text, her thoughts went utterly silent. Why her? Why? Right now? She looked back up at Charles, and the look in his eyes stopped her dead in her tracks. She had seen Charles furious. She had seen him grieving. She had seen him completely worn down to the bone. But the emotion staring back at her right now was something she had not seen in a very long time. It was terror raw, completely unguarded, and very real. His eyes were practically screaming for her not to fail him. She held his intense gaze for a long, quiet moment, and then silently mouthed one single word. "Yes." Charles exhaled slowly like an exhausted man who had been holding his breath for several weeks. The massive decision was finalized. The pact was real. Now he could finally begin taking the necessary steps to make it official. Now here is the big question everyone asks when they hear about this move. Why bypass Prince William? He is the Prince of Wales, the direct heir. He is destined to be the future king. Why would Charles skip over his eldest son to hand emergency sovereign powers to his 73-year-old sister instead? The actual answer is quite brutal, and it reveals absolutely everything about where the royal family stands today. Charles and Anne were born just 2 years apart, raised in a home where their parents were nearly always away, travelling on official duties. This meant that even when they were very small children, these siblings relied deeply on one another, forging a bond that shaped their entire lives and never truly faded. While other members of the royal family spent decades drowning in constant scandals, media storms, and endless public controversies, Princess Anne simply kept her head down and did her duty. She showed up, she worked hard, and she always told Charles the truth, even when he hated hearing it. When Charles chose to go public with Camilla, his sister Anne did not handle the situation quietly at all. She reportedly screamed at him at the top of her lungs. She warned him that the entire public would despise him, and that out of all the women on earth he chose her. She told him he did not have her blessing, not on this, not ever. Then she coldly informed him that she had taken every single gift he had sent her during that time and burned them, every single one of them. But here is the deeper truth about Anne and Charles that no staged public appearance or polished photograph could ever erase. When everything crashed down for him later, he always ran to just one trusted person, Anne. Insiders claim that when Harry fled the royal family, Charles completely broke down. Princess Anne was right there to comfort him. Some claim she held him close, and he rested his head on her shoulder in total silence for several minutes. That was the incredibly powerful bond that filled the room when he slowly slid those fateful documents across the table to her. Charles knew that if he was going to trust anyone with the crushing weight of everything he was carrying, it had to be the single person who had already survived his worst moments and chose to stay by his side anyway. Anne is more than just his sister. She remains the only person left in his entire inner circle who still treats him like a real human being first and a reigning king second. William, on the other hand, is lost in his own storm. Charles knows he is fully consumed with supporting Catherine through her difficult health recovery. The fragile bond between Charles and William had never fully healed after the Harry situation. Besides, Charles reportedly felt his son was far too consumed with managing his own household to act as the steady, unshakable hand this ancient institution needed during a real crisis. One deeper reason Charles made this decision was a secret the palace desperately hid. Just a few weeks before that secret meeting, Charles sat down with his primary medical team. The doctors had something grave to tell him about his recent medical scans, and somewhere in the middle of their grim update, sources claimed Charles suddenly screamed out, no shouting, just that single word at first. No, that simply cannot be correct. His hands shook uncontrollably for the rest of that evening, and he kept staring at them as if they belonged to someone else entirely. When Camilla later asked him how it went, he looked her dead in the eye and told her it went well. She watched his face closely when he spoke. Something was wrong, she just knew it. She tracked down a royal doctor and asked quietly if the tests had been bad. All she got back was cold silence. Charles said nothing to anyone, quietly starting the work to make Anne Regent acting fast and entirely alone. Legal documents were taking shape. He was acting before anyone could stop him. Then someone talked. Nobody knows exactly who, but some sources say the leak came from deep inside Charles's own private circle. Others claim Camilla offered something valuable to an insider to find out what Charles was doing behind closed doors. When she finally found out what was written in those documents, she was absolutely furious. What was he thinking that he could move faster than me? That was exactly what she muttered. Swinging into action immediately, she went around Charles entirely and contacted a senior palace aide directly. She wanted the entire process stopped cold. When Charles found out what she had done, something broke open deep inside him. The careful, highly deliberate pace he had been maintaining was gone instantly. He called Princess Anne that very night and requested an urgent private meeting. He needed her to step in. The signs had honestly been there for a while. When Charles personally asked Anne to serve as his gold stick in waiting at the coronation, most observers read it as a simple, tender sibling gesture. But gold stick dates all the way back to King Henry VIII. The paranoid king created it because he was terrified for his personal safety, needing the one person he trusted completely to stand closest to him at all times. On Coronation Day, Anne rode on horseback directly behind King Charles's state coach through the streets of London. She was acting as the original close protection officer, visible to the entire world. A palace insider said it plainly at the time. He is rewarding his sister for her ultimate loyalty and her unwavering devotion to royal duty above all else. That was Charles making a powerful declaration in the oldest symbolic language the British monarchy knows. And what unfolded in that quiet room with those legal documents was that exact same declaration, but written in ink powerful enough to rewrite the course of an entire nation. Yet before Charles ever walked into that room with Anne, an explosive clash occurred between Charles and Camilla that nearly stopped all his plans dead. It turned out to be the most devastating conversation of Charles's entire reign, and absolutely nobody was ever supposed to know it happened at all. That fierce fight before the meeting. Before we detail what went down between the king and his wife, you must understand what Camilla was actually fighting to protect. Everything Camilla had built over 30 brutal years. Her access, her authority, everything runs through one single engine, Charles being present, functional and active as king. If Charles became incapacitated and Anne stepped in to serve as regent, every single piece of that massive influence would vanish overnight. Camilla would lose all the hard-won power she holds. Anne, as regent, would not merely wield emergency state powers, she would control the entire daily atmosphere of that palace. The staff would answer to her. The schedule would bow to her. Access would go through her. Ultimately, the woman running the entire institution would be the single person in that building who had never once in 50 long years fully accepted Camilla. Camilla knows this truth. Reports have circulated for years that Anne has told people privately she does not fancy that woman. She has never once called Camilla queen, and behind closed doors she still refers to her as that woman, nothing more and nothing less. And Camilla would do absolutely anything at all to ensure that a woman who treats her with such contempt never gets real power. So she rushed straight to Charles to stop the entire plan. Camilla walked into Charles's private room and she was quiet, absolutely quiet. People who know her say her icy quiet is more terrifying than when she gets loud. She flatly told him what he was doing was a public humiliation wrapped inside a constitutional procedure. She made it absolutely clear the public would see this as him choosing Anne over his own wife, shattering their chain of trust. She had not survived 30 years of public humiliation just to stand in the shadow of a woman who had made her hatred for Camilla brutally obvious for 5 decades. "This is not about you," Charles snapped. Something shifted in Camilla's expression, settling into something cold and permanent. She fired back that everything in this palace was about her because she had sacrificed her entire life just to stand by his side. Her reputation, her youth, her peace. She had endured a wave of public hatred that would have shattered anyone else, and she kept moving because she believed in their future. She was not about to let him hand the keys of everything she had bled for to a woman who openly despised her. Then she brought up William. She told Charles, if not her, then William. That is how this family is actually supposed to work. Charles fell completely quiet. He offered no reply, and his heavy silence on that one point spoke louder than any words he could have managed. And that was when Charles said the one thing he could never retract. He told her Anne had been by his side every single day, and not everyone in this palace could say the same. The air in the room turned instantly suffocating. Camilla just stared at him, and then something behind her eyes went completely dead, like a heavy door locking from the inside. Anyone else would have expected her to start screaming to lose her mind, but she didn't. Her voice was quiet the way people talk when they have already accepted the absolute worst possible outcome. She told him that if he walked into that room and laid those papers down in front of Anne, then they were finished. Not in public out there, nothing would alter. She would still stand by him at every royal event. She would flash a smile for every single lens showing the world exactly what it expected to see. But he would know, and she would know too. Whatever they shared would be completely permanently dead, as if it had never existed in the first place. Charles stared at her for a quiet, heavy moment. He said nothing, simply adjusted his jacket and walked out. The utter exhaustion etched on his face when he sat with Anne was not just from his illness. It was the look of a man who had just dismantled his own marriage to do what had to be done. Just 3 days after that confrontation, a senior household aide quietly resigned, offering absolutely no explanation to the public. Insiders familiar with the palace drama revealed this aide was posted right near the hallway where the screaming match happened. Palace residences at that high level feature ambient security microphones. Several sources whisper that his sudden resignation was not his own choice. He was pushed out because of what he overheard. But to truly understand why Camilla fought so desperately to stop this, you have to look at the beginning. The feud between these two royal women did not start over a title. It started with a man. And the one who sparked that fire 50 years ago was Camilla herself, facing the only woman she has ever feared. How does a person carry a grudge for 50 years without ever uttering a single word in public? Simple Anne was not nursing a grudge. She was gathering evidence, and Camilla had been handing her ammunition since 1972. In the early 1970s, Princess Anne and Andrew Parker Bowles were genuinely involved. Those close to the palace described their bond as a genuine romance built on real feelings. But it fell apart because Andrew was Catholic. Back then, royal rules made a marriage like that impossible for a Protestant princess. They parted ways, and that should have been that. It was not even close. Before Andrew Parker Bowles married Camilla, Anne reportedly pulled Camilla aside in private. Anne knew exactly who Andrew was because she had lived it herself. She simply laid out the cold truth. She warned her that Andrew was not a man anyone could tie down and that he would wander. Camilla would spend her entire marriage watching him look elsewhere. Still, she listened to every word and married him anyway. Anne kept her distance, watching in silence without ever speaking out publicly. But years down the road, when a close friend asked her about Camilla, Anne delivered a line that nobody forgot. She said Camilla only ever wants what belongs to someone else. And that is truly the only consistent thing about her whole character. Andrew married Camilla in 1973, and that is exactly where this knot pulls so tight it almost cuts. Charles had already fallen deeply for Camilla before duty and crown pressures tore them apart. By the time the dust finally settled, Camilla had married the very man Anne loved while simultaneously sleeping with Anne's own brother. The entire mess sickened Anne to her core. Here was one woman reaching into every corner of her family, seizing things that were never hers. How could one human being be so incredibly selfish, Anne would often wonder. Rumours have persisted for years that Anne told her inner circle she simply does not fancy that woman and has never once called Camilla Queen. Behind closed doors, she still only refers to her as that woman, nothing more, nothing less. Anne was completely furious when Camilla had the absolute nerve to call her during their most turbulent period, right in the worst years of Charles and Diana's marriage. Back when the tabloids were turning their lives into a daily, public slaughter, Camilla reached out to Anne looking for quiet support. Anne actually picked up and listened to the whole thing without saying a single word. Then she made it very clear that Camilla would be getting neither. She told her straight out that she and Charles made their own choices. Diana did not ask for any of this, and she would not make it easier for her. Then she just hung up. Camilla never dared call her again. Anne had known about the secret affair long before the public did, and she never forgave it. But the real divide showed up in how they raised their children over the years. Anne raised Peter and Zara completely without any royal titles, because she wanted them to have lives that were real free from the heavy machinery of the crown. Meanwhile, she watched Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, spend years treating the royal family like a personal ladder, constantly showing up at high-profile events, grabbing onto every single opportunity the family name could open up. Anne saw right through them. They were feeding off an ancient institution. They had done absolutely nothing to serve, and it disgusted her just as much as their mother did. Then came Coronation Week. As Camilla was officially stepping into her role as Queen Consort, someone standing right next to Anne heard her mutter it plainly, "She is not my queen." She openly admitted she was glad she would never have to curtsy to that kind of woman, not ever, and she definitely didn't. When the massive moment arrived and all eyes were on them, Anne did not bend. Her face remained completely unreadable. For Anne, that cold blankness is the loudest statement she can make. these two women were not at war. This was actually worse. They had both quietly calculated that the crown mattered far more than the 50 years of wreckage left between them. So they both decided to keep every single bit of anger deeply buried, staying polite, functional, and composed when the cameras were rolling. But underneath that fragile politeness was a bitter grudge from 1972 that had slowly hardened over decades into something neither of them would ever be able to dissolve. That kind of deep tension never fades, it only hardens. It becomes part of the very air in every single room they share. And then there is one more thing, a hidden letter. Sometime in the mid-1990s, right at the absolute peak of the public destruction of Charles and Diana's marriage, Anne reportedly sat down and drafted a direct letter to Camilla. A trusted confidant whom Anne shared the writing with back then described it decades later as the most controlled, utterly devastating piece of writing they had ever read in their entire life. Anne laid out in brutally precise, careful language exactly what she believed Camilla had done to the monarchy, to Diana and to Charles himself. The letter ended with one final haunting sentence: "History will not be nearly as quiet about this as I have chosen to be." Anne never actually sent it. She simply folded it, sealed it, and as far as anyone knows, it still sits waiting somewhere. Camilla has never confirmed if she knows about the letter, but sources close to Anne say she has never once thought of destroying it. That letter has been sitting sealed for 30 long years. Anne never needed to send it because she always knew this day would eventually come. And now Camilla is not just facing the one royal who has never accepted her. She is facing the exact woman who is about to become the most powerful force inside the British monarchy. And there is absolutely nothing she can do to stop it, or stop what this new title actually means for everyone. Most people hear the title Princess Royal Regent and have no clue how heavy those words really are. In Britain there is a strict law called the Regency Act. It was written in 1953, and what it says is brutally simple. If the king ever becomes completely unable to perform his royal duties, another person steps in and takes everything over. Not as some ceremonial figurehead, and not as an advisor, but in a total way, with every single royal power transferred completely. They essentially become the functioning monarch of the United Kingdom for as long as the crisis lasts. That is exactly what Anne is preparing for. That is the exact plan Charles is putting in motion right now. The last time Britain actually had to use this emergency law was under King George III. George III lost his mind completely and terrifyingly. He deteriorated so badly over the years that the entire country simply could not function with him sitting on the throne. Britain was forced to run on emergency powers for years while the king sat isolated far beyond reach or any recovery. It was easily one of the darkest chapters in the entire history of the crown, and that is the exact trigger Charles just pulled. The last time the British government used this exact tool, the king never actually came back. And now Charles is using it because Anne is the only person he can truly trust. Right after the Regent plan was set in motion, William reportedly demanded a private meeting with the king. He didn't hear about those papers from his father, but from others. Whispers went through the household. He arrived completely composed, left in under 20 minutes. People who saw him in the hallway later described him as totally controlled, yet he was moving incredibly fast. And in a man like William, that tense posture is its own clear answer. Now, before we go further, let us be totally clear about this because it matters enormously. This regent designation doesn't touch William's position, not even slightly. He is still Prince of Wales. He is still the next heir to the throne. He will still become the King of England. Absolutely nothing about that changes. What this regent title really means is simply this. If Charles becomes completely unable to perform his sovereign duties right now while he is still alive and sitting on the throne, Anne steps in and runs everything in his place. She holds that raw power until Charles recovers, or until the crown passes naturally down to William. Those are two completely separate things. Anne protects the crown today, William inherits it eventually. But knowing all that did not make walking into that quiet room any easier for William, because this was still his own father looking him in the eye and choosing someone else. An insider close to the exchange said Charles told his son directly that this was absolutely not a reflection on his fitness to rule, and that his place in the line of succession remained completely untouched and permanent for the future, that one day the crown would definitely be his and absolutely nothing about that had changed. It was simply a reflection of what the royal institution needed right now today. While Charles sat there making all the decisions, William apparently said very little in response. He simply thanked his father. He stood, he walked out, and the hardest thing wasn't William leaving. It was Charles sitting there alone, watching his son walk out of that room and not calling him back. Around that same time, Charles quietly elevated Anne's devoted husband, Timothy Laurence, to Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order. Timothy has spent 30 long years being almost entirely invisible by royal standards. He is Anne's husband and a former naval officer, always polite, composed, and almost never in the headlines, receiving no title when marrying Anne. For 3 decades he stood behind her without a single complaint. The Royal Victorian Order is the monarch's own personal gift, a direct expression of gratitude coming straight from the sovereign himself. Camilla and Catherine are in that elite circle. Now Timothy sits alongside them. The man who never once asked for a single thing in 30 years is being told quietly and deliberately that his loyalty has been seen. By doing that, at this highly precise moment, Charles is reinforcing every single person who is actually keeping the institution together right now. Because here is what the working royal family actually looks like right now. Charles is managing a difficult cancer diagnosis while still showing up, while Catherine has been largely away from public duties to recover. Harry is completely gone from active royal life. Andrew is gone too. The people carrying the heavy daily weight of the royal institution are a much smaller, more exhausted group than they were even 5 years ago. And Anne sits at the absolute centre of that group. While the rest of the family spent long years managing image crises and Sussex drama, Anne was doing exactly what she has always done. She showed up, she did the hard work, and she never cared whether anyone was watching. In 2023, she did 457 engagements, beating Charles. She competed in the 1976 Montreal Olympics as an equestrian, becoming the first British royal to ever compete at that level. In 1974, someone tried to kidnap her. The attacker pulled her car over at gunpoint. Anne looked straight at him and told him not bloody likely. Her nervous system simply doesn't process fear like the rest of us. She raised both Peter and Zara completely without royal titles because she wanted them to have something real in life. For her entire adult life, she showed up for causes with no cameras, attending engagements with no headlines, never once needing any of it to be noticed. Anne once described that heavy moment during her mother's funeral, when the crown was removed from Queen Elizabeth's coffin. She said she felt relief, not grief specifically, even though the deep grief was obviously there. Relief that her mother's incredibly long years of duty had finally been allowed to end. She also revealed that Queen Elizabeth had actually worried about dying at Balmoral because she was afraid it would create logistical difficulties for everyone around her. Even in her very final days, the Queen was thinking about the inconvenience her own death might cause other people. Anne sat with her, gently telling her to stop. Duty was never just a show. It was the only language she had ever completely trusted, and this is what Charles looked at when deciding Anne would be the one to rule. The process is still in motion, the documents are being formalised, and when it is done, the British monarchy,